So you've watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, right? You've seen the giant robots and the, let's be honest, baffling ending. And you've probably walked away thinking, what on earth did I just watch? It's a common feeling, especially if you're coming to it for the first time. It can be tough to grasp why this show is such a legend. But the reason, it's actually a lot simpler than you might think.
See, the thing about Evangelion is the plot, that's not really the story. The context is everything. The real genius, the heart of the show, is buried way, way down. And to get to it, we're going to have to do a little digging. Think of ourselves as archaeologists.
Yeah, the real mystery of Eva isn't about, what are the angels or what's the big conspiracy. No. The real question is, why was this thing even made in the first place? The meaning is buried under all these layers, history, psychology, the creator's own mind, and that is exactly what we're going to excavate today.
Okay, so let's start our dig. Layer 1, the soil. The ground this whole story grew out of. And that means we have to go back to 1990s Japan, a time that was just defined by this crushing sense of hopelessness. You really have to get the kind of whiplash the entire country was feeling. The 80s, that was the bubble era. Japan was on top of the world. There was this shared belief, this promise. Hey, work hard and you're set. The future's bright. But then, the 90s hit. The bubble popped. And just like that, an entire generation found themselves staring at a future that was not getting better. That promise, that social contract, totally broken.
And that right there brings us to Shinji's iconic line, right? I mustn't run away. That wasn't just some anime catchphrase. It was literally the cry of a generation. Society was screaming at them, keep trying, don't give up. But they could look around and see that working hard didn't mean you'd succeed anymore. And that contradiction, that insane pressure to perform in a system you know is broken, that's the very air the characters in Evangelion are breathing.
All right, let's dig a little deeper. We hit the next layer. Now, the whole thing between Shinji and his dad, Gendo, it seems super extreme, right? But here's the thing. Gendo wasn't just some over-the-top sci-fi bad guy. He was a dark mirror, reflecting a very, very real family dynamic of the time.
Yeah, Gendo's coldness is, well, it's theatrical for sure, but it was an exaggeration of something totally real. For so many kids growing up in 90s Japan, their dad was this distant figure. Physically there sometimes, but emotionally gone. Completely dedicated to work, but absent in home. And this created this huge communication breakdown that pretty much defined a whole generation of families.
So think about it. When Shinji asks his dad, "What should I do?" It's not just him being weak. It's the desperate plea of a whole generation of sons trying to reach these unknowable fathers. It's this cry for help, for guidance, from a guy who's supposed to be an authority figure, but feels like a total stranger. People watching this back then, they didn't just see a character, they saw their own lives on screen.
Okay, on to the next layer of our dig, the pilots themselves. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Today, they might feel like pretty familiar anime tropes, right? The whiny kid, the loud one, the quiet one. But back in 1995, this was revolutionary. They were these radically, almost uncomfortably real portraits of teenage anxiety. They weren't just characters. They felt more like psychological case studies.
Let's kick things off with Shinji. His whole sense of self-worth, it's completely tied to whether or not he's useful to other people, especially his dad. He's desperate for praise because he has absolutely zero internal self-esteem. And this leaves him paralyzed by this deep, deep fear of getting close to people and being hurt. He's really a product of a culture that often values what other people think of you way more than what you think of yourself.
And then we've got Asuka. That loud, super aggressive personality, that is not confidence. It's a shield. It's a frantic performance she puts on to hide a crippling fear of being seen as weak or worthless, of being abandoned. Every single thing she does is a scream for validation, because deep down she is terrified that if she isn't the absolute best, she's nothing.
And finally, we have Rei, who represents a totally different kind of anxiety. Her sense of self is so fragile that she finds safety in just playing a role. Her entire identity is Eva Pilot. That's it. She just follows orders because, let's be real, it's way easier than trying to figure out who you are or what you actually want. She basically embodies that terror a lot of young people feel when they have to build an identity from the ground up.
Okay, we're going deep now. We've reached the final layer, the core of this whole excavation. Because to truly, truly understand Evangelion, you have to understand the mind of the person who made it. And this right here is the key that unlocks the entire thing.
Evangelion is one of those incredibly rare pieces of pop culture where the creator's mental health crisis isn't just, an influence on the work. It is the work. It's the central subject. As the director, Hideaki Anno, was going through this prolonged, severe battle with depression while making the show itself completely transformed. It became a direct projection of what was happening inside his own head.
And you can literally see this happen in the show's structure. It starts off as a pretty standard giant robot anime, right? Kids and mechs fighting giant monsters from space. Cool. But then, about halfway through, the whole thing just pivots. The real enemies aren't the angels outside anymore. They're the monsters inside. The depression, the anxiety, the self-hatred. The show's climax isn't a big physical fight. It's this raw, messy, psychological breakdown. Anna wasn't just making a TV show. He was working through his own stuff, trying to save himself on screen.
So okay, we've excavated all these layers. Let's step back and look at what we found. How does a show that is so specific to one time and one place still feel so powerful today?
Simple, because it was an absolute revolution. At the time, anime was full of these perfect heroes who always won because they tried really hard and believed in the power of friendship, the drill. Evangelion came along, took that entire idea, and just shattered it. It showed a world where the heroes didn't want to fight, where their hearts could break, and maybe most importantly, where the adults were just as confused and lost as the kids were.
So when you get right down to it, you can almost think of Evangelion's magic as a formula. You take the anxiety of 90s Japan, you multiply it by a brutally honest look at teenage psychology, add in a timeless father-son conflict, and then filter all of that through the very real, raw depression of its creator. It wasn't just a story, it was like the captured soul of an entire era.
And that's really what makes it timeless. This is one of those rare stories that actually grows up with you. When you're a teenager, man, you feel Shinji's pain. Then you hit your 20s, and you totally get Asuka's desperate ambition. You get into your 30s, and suddenly Masato's burden feels really familiar. And maybe, later on, you can even start to recognize the deep, crushing loneliness in someone like Gendo. The show it meets you wherever you are in life.
So, in the end, getting Evangelion isn't about solving some complicated plot puzzle. It's about understanding the messy, complex, human reality it was born from. The plot, the giant robots, that's all just the vehicle for this deep dive into the human condition. So the real question I have for you is this. Now that you see all the layers, when you go back and watch it again, who are you going to see differently?